I'm Matthew Lester from the Rhodes Business School. Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan has presented the medium-term budget framework speech in possibly what are the most difficult financial circumstances South Africa has ever faced. The MTBF speech happens in October. That's when only about a third of the taxes are collected for the fiscal year. The big money is still to come from the December Christmas sales and then, of course, from the provisional payments back in February. What can Pravin Gordhan make of the numbers so far? And what is his outlook of South Africa in the current global financial crisis?
The big question must be growth rates. Is South Africa back on track with this, as it will have a major impact on tax collections and national deficits? Well, we've seen that growth rates are a lot slower than they were. Back in February, Pravin Gordhan said South Africa would do 2.7% this year, growing to 4.2% by 2014. The downward adjustment was expected, but in the MTBS they have said 2.5%, slightly down, and that the 4.2% will be there by 2015. On growth rates, we can say South Africa is back on track. There are minor changes, but this is all based on a global growth forecast of 3.3% for 2012 and 3.6% for 2013. The IMF staff's fan chart now puts a 1 in 6 chance on global growth falling below 2%, dependent on the outcomes in the US and Eurozone. If that would happen, it would have a remarkable impact on South Africa. So there's your vulnerability. Fortunately, the Sharks haven't made a trophy yet, so the correlation between recessions and Sharks victories remains, but they're getting closer to a cup now, so maybe we've got to be careful. Earlier this month, the President has called a summit of government, labour and business to try and find a way forward. And there is a massive shopping list trying to make a better lot on all fronts in South Africa. Why this is going on is quite simply that 2.5% growth rates are not sufficient to drive the bus. Moving on to tax collections. When we fall into lower growth rates, of course, tax collections are threatened. Right, so the forecast as we have it at the moment is that the 742 billion rand forecast for 2012 is banked. Move on. They make a budget approximately 8% up for 2013 of 826 billion, and at MTBS Day they reckon they're going to get very close to that with 821 billion rand. The important point though is that individuals' tax collections are slightly below budget. Companies are still struggling with the knock-on from the global credit crunch, with a third of companies being in assessed loss positions. Funnily enough, VAT is doing its bit. It didn't do so last year. Dividend tax is not hurting South Africa by much. We're slightly short there. We're smoking enough. Very importantly, we're not driving enough. We're slightly down on fuel levy collections. I'm going to return to that in a moment. Then customs and excise on imports of machinery, etc. looks okay, and all in we come out at 5 billion short on a target of 826 billion. Not too shabby, Nige. What does it mean for the taxpayer? On the corporate tax side, this means that South Africa can keep to its game plan of having lower tax rates for companies. Currently we have a maximum marginal tax rate of 40% for individuals on income over 617,000 rand and a maximum CGT rate for individuals of 13.3. On companies we have a 28% tax rate where income is retained within the company, and if it is undeclared in a dividend, then we reach an effective tax rate of 37%. And on capital, CGT and dividend tax together result in a 32% effective rate of tax. With the current tax collections, it looks like these types of differentials can be maintained. When we look at the individual's tax table, in next year's budget we can expect that the individual taxpayer will be able to maintain a good deal. But we do not see tax thresholds increasing a major amount because we need a large number of taxpayers to pay a small amount to keep it all going. We will get small fiscal drag adjustments going right through the scales. Probably the 617,000 Rand will be pushed out next year a little bit, but with tax collections at their current rate, we do not expect an increase in the super tax level next year. The old boogeyman, CGT collections, again featured in the stats surveys recently, and people are asking, will capital gains tax increase again next year? Well, latest statistics show that at maximum, they're getting about 10 billion Rand a year from CGT. And during 2012, this collection actually declined. Individuals were paying very little, and companies paying about 5 billion. So the whole CGT exercise has only brought in 43 billion Rand over the 10 years that we've had it. CGT is not going to solve South Africa's problems, and the 2012 increase may be just a position to steady the ship and stop CGT collections from declining further. On fuel levy, I am very worried. We have a position that in 2011 the levy was 261 for fuel and 247 for diesel, and that was increased by only 28 cents a litre to 2 Rand 89 and 2 Rand 75 with effect from 1 April 2012. That brought an extra 5 billion Rand into the fiscus, up from 37 to 42. But in the current forecasts, we are 1.7 billion off that target of 42 billion Rand. If that is coupled with the Gauteng fuel debacle, I am getting very nervous about what's going to happen to fuel levies when we finally sort this out in February 2013. So where does this leave the national deficit? Well, Pravin Gordhan's detailed figures take a lot of reading. We had the problem in 2011, which basically recovered itself. The budget for 2013 was set at 152 billion at MTBF. That's been increased to 157 billion, or 4.8% of GDP. The forecast for next year is a slightly bigger increase from 141 to 161, with the debt to GDP ratio staying above the 4% mark. The 2015 mark has also been pushed out to 146 billion, or 3.7% of GDP, and the elusive 3% barrier for borrowing to GDP ratio, or 134 billion Rand and 3.1%, has been set out at 2016. One wonders if this will satisfy the international rating agencies. We'll have to see what happens. So what's the problem? The problem with the MTBF is it's too early in the year to get a full reflection. A tremendous amount of the taxes of South Africa are paid in November, December, January every year. Over the festive season, when we get all the Christmas bonuses paid, that increases individuals' tax, and of course there's a great big slug of VAT and customs and excise duty associated with the Christmas shopping basket. What we've got to see is, will the consumer come out to play this Christmas? And what effect will that have when we get to budget 2013? Then will we really know how much tax has been collected. Meanwhile, another difficulty has emerged. Jill Marcus at the Reserve Bank is not having it easy. The balance of payments current account, which recovered so nicely during the early days of the Marcus regime, has now declined away, and we see an imbalance. One has to say, well, what will the effect be on interest rates? At this stage it doesn't seem to be much, because they know that the downward pressure on interest rates must be maintained to keep the economy going. So we will continue probably in a low interest rate cycle. This leaves the Rand very vulnerable, and we have seen in October a 7% weakening in exchange rates across the board. And of course that has the effect on oil prices as well, and will affect the price at the pump. The concerns at the Reserve Bank are primarily around the balance of payments current account, which has widened from 3.3% of GDP in 2011 to today at 5.9%. The Rand is weaker. The consumer price index has increased to 5.7% per annum. Food inflation has increased from 5.1% in 2012 to 9% by 2013. Exports remain subdued in spite of a weaker exchange rate, and the mining sector has not helped with its latest crises, which have cost 10.1 billion rand in lost production, let alone the knock-on effect. So we live to fight another day, and that's always a good approach to take in South Africa. We will have to wait and see what happens in February 2013 before we see the end of this story. I'm Matthew Lester at the Rhodes University Business School. Thank you for your attention.